What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before I introduce my buddy, Dave Swanson, who I think you guys are really going to love, I'm going to first dedicate the show. And I honestly don't think about who I'm going to dedicate the show to until I say those words. So for everybody that knows my story somewhat, my brother, his anniversary was on the 12th. And two of my best friends who are like family to me, they call me their brother, and their kids are my nieces and nephews and whatever. The Gilroy family, Chris and Kevin, their birthday was yesterday. They're twins. One's 6'8" and the other was 5'10". They don't look anything remotely close to being alike. But they are, their family. My mom and dad moved. My mom and stepfather moved to a different town the summer before my senior year. And I didn't want to leave the school that I was in. So I lived with the Gilroy family. And, they pretty much treated me like one of their own sons, the fourth son. And there's three boys and one girl, Kelly, Scott, Chris, and Kevin. And their birthday was on the 14th yesterday. So I just wanted to wish them both a happy birthday and dedicate this show to Chris and Kevin Gilroy. So there's that. The podcast, where can you hear the podcast? Anywhere that podcasts are pretty much heard. I'm on 12 or 13 platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Anchor, you name it, it's probably there. My book. So I've tried to become very intentional about promoting my book, because someone told me that I'm a horrible salesperson because I never talk about my book or promote it. So here's the book, A Brother's Love and Memoir. You can find it on Amazon. If you've read it already, you haven't left an Amazon review and a rating, I would appreciate it if you did. That helps me a lot as far as when the SEO and all that kind of stuff, searching and all that. So all that's done. Now I get to introduce my buddy, Dave. Dave Swanson is a West Point grad, retired as a captain, I believe, from the Army. He's a speaker. He's an author. His book is called The Dot on the Left. Really cool book. He's a podcast host. It's called Goat Wrestling Perseverance. That's a tongue twister, but it's a very good. When you hear what goat wrestling means, then you'll get it. And he's just an all-around good dude. So I just wanted to thank you, buddy, for being on the show and welcome you to Two Dates and a Dash podcast.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure being here, Matt. And again, thank you for being on my show. I love that episode. And here I am 40 plus episodes later, much like yourself. And so I did not think I was going to love podcasting that much. And I've been missing out. I wish I had started doing this a long time ago. So thanks for having me on.
Well, dude, we met, I was almost coming on 2 years ago, right? Down in Baltimore at the Ogden Speaking Academy event down there. So that's how we met. And I didn't get a whole lot out of that event other than I met some cool people. You and Reggie and Brian Keys and a couple other guys that we all connected and we stay connected on Facebook. So for me, the value that I got from that event was more so the connecting with people than necessarily the event itself. But I'm glad I went because I met guys like you.
Yeah, no, it's those kind of conferences and those things that you get to go to those, you don't realize the people that you meet. And one of them for me was one of my classmates. We were friends at school and we knew each other, but when 1,000 people graduate from West Point, you're kind of not all best friends, right? You're in different companies, you're in different majors, and getting to see him again, we've really touched base. And, earlier this year, I went back and I went to my first Founders Day dinner since West Point in March, and I was the speaker at it. And it was in North Carolina, and so he had me out for that. And you never know where those kind of relationships where you fall back into them. And, it was kind of nice, not just that one, but meeting you. And of course, Reggie and I deployed to Iraq together. And, there's so many great people.
Well, you've seen the show. I asked one question and then we just kind of figured it out. And people want to know, maybe not everybody understands why I created the show that way. As a cop, when I'm interviewing somebody or a suspect, I don't know the answers. I'm trying to find the answers. I'm investigating. And it always starts with one question. Where were you that night? Or do you know this person? And it usually just grows from that one question. And how they answer that question determines the direction my conversation with them goes. So I figured that's kind of my wheelhouse. It's kind of what I've been doing for the last 30 years. I might as well do that with the podcast. So it just sort of became the way the show, it's a cool little, one question, who is whatever. And it's kind of worked its way through as being something pretty cool and unique about the show, which I like. So the question I'm about to ask. So I'm going to ask you, just like I ask everybody else, who is Dave Swanson?
So that question, as you probably get for everybody, has just been interesting because I thought I knew who I was all this time. And it wasn't until just a few years ago. I'd finished up my MBA at University of Texas. And I received this award. It's the Dean's Leadership and Service Award. And I got this award, and it was just for being who I was. I had no idea that this award existed. I hadn't, and it was voted on by the admin and the instructors that ran it. Like, this guy is, he's the leader of the class. And I had no idea this award existed. I always felt was the when I finished there, I got that award. I felt like I was this leader of leaders that were in my class, that I should start doing what I love doing. And that really became that thing where it defined who I was. And I was like, well, what was my only A+ at West Point? Well, that was public speaking. So I should probably be doing that. I've always enjoyed sharing a message. And for some reason or another, I think it's because my father was a truck driver, was that I can share stories. I can hit these points that are good for people. And you know what? It's about hearing their stories back to me that I really enjoy doing. So I started doing speaking, and in that first year, it's tough getting yourself going and speaking up, getting going. And my very first speak engagement where I got paid a $75 Amazon gift card, which you're like, hey, that I've been speaking for free. So that's good. Right. And you're like, yes. And then a year later, I'm speaking in front of Fortune 500 companies for $5,000 a speech. And so you find yourself kind of in this, back and forth of doing that. And it was never about the money to go do the speaking. It was about sharing lessons on leadership and resiliency and doing all of that. And I found out that the real big thing for me is sharing a message consistently. And so whether that's social media, writing my book, writing blogs, all that stuff, I've really enjoyed doing. And just like I mentioned earlier about the podcast, getting the idea of learning that and sharing it with others through these perseverance stories, that's really what's been my driver. And yeah, I may have done all this stuff up until that point, but it wasn't until just 3 years ago when I graduated from that school that I found out that's who I am and what I love doing. So
that's cool. Yeah, I think throughout life we evolve, and we have our core values and beliefs and who we are in our essence, but that grows and matures. And what was once interesting when you're 18 is no longer interesting when you're 48. Those things are all evolving within us. And I think the fact that you were able to come out of your MBA program and identify your strengths and utilize those strengths to become successful in being an author and a speaker and a podcast host, I think that's just understanding where you're going to have your highest value of success. And I think that's a lot of people spend a lot of time. And I'm a firm believer that doing shit that you suck at a lot just is going to make you sucky. And if people say, oh, you got to work harder at the stuff you suck at. And I'm like, I've really tried that method before, and I really just got marginally less sucky. That's the best I ever got at it. I never came out of it great when I sucked. I just got a little less sucky. And to me, that's just not a value prop for me that I want to spend time becoming marginally less sucky. So knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, knowing where you have your best opportunity to have value in other people's lives, that's where you should be spending your time.
Yeah, and I mean, we kind of glossed over all the other stuff that I did before that too, and so.
Well, we have an hour.
Yeah, no,
we had all that stuff.
No, but it's I did had a 750 out of 1600 SAT score. I dropped out of junior college. I wasn't doing well, and then I decided to apply. Let's just call it the toughest school in the country. Go to West Point. That was a struggle. That's what that book is about. But then, once I had this good academic year, I still have 4 more years of West Point, and that wasn't easy either. I mean, there's generally like a 20 to 30%, attrition rate of these people that go to that school that are all highly qualified. And it's just, I thought it was going to get easier after West Point, and it doesn't. I end up going into combat. And as you know, with Reggie's story, you had him on here first, April 4th, 2000, infantry platoon leader with 40 guys. And I end up being in 100 firefights in Iraq. And you're like, okay, this is kind of what's going to end up happening. And the whole thing about, becoming less sucky at it, I would say for me has always just been, I've always had that mentality, talking about strengths and weaknesses, and there's, knowing your 5 strengths. And I know for me, it's always been achiever, focus, and context. So for me, those things where I find out the background or I have to learn about things before I'm able to move forward. And so I know that that's my strength. And that's why it took me about 3 or 4 months of reflection after I graduated to go, what is it that I really love doing? But it took a lot of thinking of what I wanted to do, what I was good at. And when that all came through, it turned out all right, obviously. But, there's a lot of stuff before that moment that I decided that had to happen to me in order for me to recognize what I was good at.
That's a good segue. So obviously, how old are you now? 40? Are you 40 yet?
Yeah, I'm 41.
41.
I'm doing 42, and I'm going to make a little plug for my buddy Joe Quinn. He runs a nonprofit called Headstrong, which you've seen on Facebook. It's about marrying up these therapists and, counselors for veterans that aren't getting the services at VA or other locations. And so, they're helping facilitate those relationships. And then I can't think of a better thing for veterans and working with PTSD and working through all of that. And Joe, who's a classmate of mine, went to Harvard, running this group now. He's doing an amazing job. So that'll be in a few weeks, is my 42nd birthday.
All right, everybody, Headstrong, check it out. All right, so let's go back to the early days of Dave Swanson. Let's talk about your family dynamics. Let's talk about your childhood and how you grew up and the blueprint that was laid inside of you throughout your life. Let's see where that started from. So let's talk about Dave, the kid.
There's 2 stories that really define me, and I'll start with the one you haven't heard yet. And when I was 5 years old, we got a motorcycle, a little Yamaha 50, and it was just one of those things. I lived in rural Ohio. Everybody's got an acre, couple acres, and so riding a motorcycle is a very common thread, actually. And I got on this little motorcycle, and I was only allowed to ride in circles because my parents didn't want to chase me out onto the road. And so I just kept riding in circles and circles, and I fell asleep. And so I fell asleep on the motorcycle. I run straight into the fence. Boom, crash into the fence. Everybody comes running over. And they're worried about me, and they check me out. I'm fine. And they're like, all right, I guess we're going to go inside. I was like, no, I'm going to get right back on the motorcycle. I want to ride the motorcycle. And that's what I did. I kept riding the motorcycle. I mean, this was not like just a nice, just lay down job of a motorcycle. This was like full on T-bone of this little Yamaha 50 with this chain link fence. And so that's kind of how it always was at that age. And, I told the other similar story, which, for my podcast, people probably want to hear that, the goat wrestling story. Again, rural Ohio, and my neighbor had horses and goats and other things. And one of them gets into our backyard. And my father's out there with my brother and I, where we always played football and sports together. And my dad says to my brother, hey, Brian, go get that goat. And he takes off running into the house. And then my father says to me, he says, David, go get that goat. And I run over to it and I wrestle it to the ground. And I just say, what do you want me to do next? And so that became this kind of mantra of my life, like make the decision, wrestle the goat, don't worry about what's next. And that's kind of the tagline of the book. That's kind of who I've always been. And in the story that's also in the book, I found out that years later, my father always thought about that story. And he said, I should have known that that's how you were going to live your life. And that's kind of how I always lived my life. I just always made that decision. I'm going to go after it with the best of my ability. And then I can't control what's going to happen next. Just what I can't control, I am going to do. So that's a couple of stories from us progress more into that with sports and struggling in sports, academics, all of that stuff. And I found that there was this blueprint that the harder I work, the luckier I get. You've heard that phrase. And it seems to work. I didn't, it works today. It still works at any given point in your life. But I think it's a lot of people get stuck in those three things. Either it's making the decision, wrestling a goat, which is really a dream or goal that you have. And then people stop and worry about what's next, when in reality, you can't always control the outcome of things. It's just control the what them can be.
So when growing, you had one sibling, just your brother?
No, I had both older sister, older brother. And so my sister was about 6 years older. And, when you're like in sixth grade and she's a senior in high school, I mean, the last thing she's going to want to do is hang out with you, right? Like, I mean, I was the annoying little brother. My brother, he was a year and a half older than me. And it's in the book. You'll find out if you read the book. But, I mean, if I didn't get a daily beating from my brother, that just seemed to be the case for me. And with my mouth and understanding, I deserve kind of how I grew. On my 8th birthday, I took my birthday money. We went and watched Rocky IV. So that tells you exactly how old I was. And so we went to go do that. And you know what? We came back to the backyard. All we had was practice gloves. And I challenged my brother, and my dad said, okay, I'll be the referee for this. And I got hit one time, knocked out. And guess what? I'm still sitting there challenging my brother, who was always a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier. It was just, I was always the underdog in every fight. But that's just kind of how it always was. Very competitive family. We always played sports. And, in high school, my son was attractive and was, on the cheerleading squad, made straight A's. My brother, he started varsity sports as a freshman. I mean, and you think, here I come along, I'm going to be killing it. And at 5'2" and 92 pounds as a freshman in high school, you're not killing anything, right? Like you're just like, I just hope I don't get beat up today, And so that's how it was, and it didn't come right to me. And in high school, I didn't start on the varsity basketball team until I was a junior in high school, and that meant a lot of summers where I spent 10 to 15 hours a day and dribbling a basketball until my fingers bled. And so that's just kind of the mentality I had from the.
Well, that's, was that instilled you by your father? Was that just something that naturally, from being the youngest and seeing your older brother and your older sister's life unfold in front of you, looking up to them? Like, where do you think that desire to compete and that desire to never quit, where did that start?
Well, it'd be a shame if I didn't tell the story that, my father and I think my mother's first date was that they went to go, I want to say it was play pool. And they grew up in a small town in Ohio. And it was the first time, I guess, my father anything. And my mom is very competitive. I mean, even now, she's about to turn 70 early next year. Even now, like with Yahtzee or Scrabble or any of that stuff, like it's still very competitive, right? And so playing games has just always been part of that family. And this is not just my mom and dad. This is my grandmother and grandfather, and they had 10 kids. And then my other side of my family, my dad's side, they had 7. So when I tell people that, like, I had almost like 17 aunts and uncles and like 50-something first cousins, it's and we're all competitive. Being around other competitive people creates you to be competitive too, right? And then you think that, oh, wow, I'm going to do this. And then you get in the military, and then I'm at West Point. So can you imagine like this uber competitiveness that I'm constantly been around? And it took it took a long time to break, because being that way is not healthy in certain parts of life. But I used to be that competitive on every level in everything. And then I had to realize that like that wasn't good for my psyche. Wasn't good. I wasn't going to win every time. And so, but for when I was, being 5'2" and 92 pounds and being not the fastest guy and being all of this stuff, heart is what made everything. And that's what I think the competitiveness it did for me, is that, you can't be measured by the heart you give, right? And the effort that you give. And that was the only thing you could be guaranteed that I could do, and that was give my best effort. And so that's really where all that came from. My mother being competitive, but then my dad wouldn't be competitive. And I would see him out in the garage in Ohio in the summer working on stuff until always trying to fix something and do all that. And it was just this, lead by example type mentality that he had. He never said anything about it. It was just for me to observe. And although I hated all that stuff, I hated messing with cars, I hated messing with any of that stuff, it still doesn't mean that that's not a good formula for being successful in other parts of life. And so I think that's where it all stood for me, is like watching them, being in a competitive environment, and just seeing that leadership by example of like working hard. You don't always see that from parents sometimes. And to see it is.
It's funny you say that, because I grew up without a dad for the first 12 years of my life till my mom remarried. And people ask me where I get my work ethic from. And my mom, I don't ever remember her not working 3 jobs. I remember I would, she'd work her day job, she'd come home, make dinner, go to her evening job, get done at 11, and then have to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning to work the early morning shift at like an AM PM mark. And the moments we had with my mom were more so in transition between jobs, but they were very intense, those moments. But I just remember my mom's legs aching, and we would sit on her legs because it made her legs feel better when we were little, and she would give us a candy bar for sitting on her legs. And I just remember thinking, my mom works so hard that she's constantly in pain. But that's where my work ethic came from. And I remember it's just from watching and paying attention, that repetitive acknowledgement of someone else's effort. And people ask me all the time, why do you work so hard? Why do you work so many hours? Why do you work so many jobs? How come you have so many hats? How can you do all the things you do? It's because I know my kids watch me. And I want them to know, if I'm not telling them exactly how to do things, I want them to know what it looks like to give 100% every single day in everything you're doing. So I totally get that your dad did those things in the garage, knowing that you were watching and hoping that some of that intensity and intention that he was putting into whatever it was he was doing would be shown to you in a way that you would then it would be etched in your mind, so that you could remember it when you're 41 years old on a podcast.
Yeah, it's you led me to another story, and of course it's easy for me to tell stories on here, right? And so, as a plebe or a new cadet at West Point, you sit at a table, you don't look up, you look at the crest on the West Point plate, and you have a squad leader that's sitting with you, and it's very prim and proper the way you eat. And my parents have heard this story, so if they do hear this, they're not going to be surprised. And so, the squad leader is kind of bored. We've got like 10 minutes before the lunch is over. Everybody's finished eating. He's like, all right, let's just go around the table and talk about what our parents do. And you already know sarcastic language. And so, it goes a few people, and they say, doctor, lawyer, senator, colonel, general. These are what people's parents do. This is, it's a big deal. And one of them, I won't say his name, but his father was really well off, and he went to high school with Prince William. That's royalty. I get it. Okay. And they get to me, and, they're like, Swanson, what does your parents do? I said, well, my dad's a truck driver. My mom's a bus driver. And the entire table starts laughing. Not like ho, ho, he, he. It was a hearty laugh, in which everybody, you're, and I was so naive. I didn't understand what was that moment, and and the squad leader goes, well, no, Swanson, seriously, what do they do? I said, that is what they do. And it was at that moment, the rest of the table, all the new cadets, right back down on the crest of the West Point plate. And it took years for me to understand that I didn't come from this, this place of privilege. I didn't, my parents didn't know a congressman to have them sign off, or, I've mentored some of these guys that have transitioned out of the military, and they got presidential nominations because their friends with the president or vice president and all this stuff. And you kind of look at that, and I had no idea this existed, and so it's that blue collar, if you want to say work ethic, and the way to understand it, I think kind of that moment and years later that I realized that, some of these guys are like third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation West Pointers. And I had one uncle that was in the Navy, and I'm not going to count that as him being in the military. And so, that was my only example. Sorry to the other branches. I just like to joke around. But
seriously, that was the military. Just kidding.
They're just, they're like the Uber of the sea for the Marines. That's really all it is, And so, but that's what I had. And it's not that I thought less of the people that got there because of the with people and hold my own. That's the way I felt about it. I could hold my own in a room of people that are, just unbelievably gifted and talented and incredibly smart and athletic. I always felt like I was Rudy. I was going to Notre Dame and I was trying to get in. I didn't get to play football there, but getting into the same academic room as these people, I refer to myself as like this mental David Goggins. Like, he does all the physical stuff, and I'm like, I would drop out of junior college, 0.6 GPA in high school, and I was in the bottom 50% of my class, and yet I still graduated with these people that were Oxford. They went to Oxford. They were Rhodes Scholars. These are the same people I was in classrooms with. And I was able just to survive, just like Rudy on the football field. You're just able to survive. That's how I was in the classroom. I was just trying to survive and make it through.
One of my biggest regrets, and it's not really a regret because I am where I am because of the life I've lived, but I had an appointment to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. And I went the summer before up to do they call it their AIM program. And I did that, and everything was great, going well, got the appointment, and then I enlisted in the Army on my 18th birthday. And I did it for many reasons, but looking back on it after having spent a lot of time reflecting in my life, I was scared shitless to go because I was a smoke and mirrors kid. I went to a school where I was a 4.0, top 10 in my class, had great SATs, but it was all smoke and mirrors. It wasn't any intellect. It was I had an ability to regurgitate shit and put it back onto a piece of paper and forget all about it. I had no knowledge in my head. I was just a gifted test taker. But I had there was something in my brain that wouldn't work with math. I couldn't do analytical anything at the time. I had no idea. I sucked at algebra. I sucked at trig. I sucked at calc. I sucked at it all. And I didn't even own a calculator. That's how poor we were. And you needed a calculator for those classes. So I would sit next to my person in class, and I would use their calculator to do my equations. And that's what I did on tests. I would borrow calculators and try to do them as quickly when they were done with the calculator. So, but I knew that if I went there, it was a science and math-based curriculum up at the academy, and I was going to get found out to be a fraud. But I knew I could go in the military, and that I would probably be good there in the armies. Like I wasn't afraid of it. But then I went Intel, and I got to Intel school, and I did decoding. It's all analytical. It's all math and using that side of your brain. And I was almost failed out of Intel school because I was so goddamn stubborn. I couldn't get my brain to work. And it wasn't until I just one teacher, I felt like it was like a Goodwill Hunting, and I had Robin Williams as my instructor. But there's this one instructor at Intel school that pulled me aside and he said, "We got to teach you how to learn." Because I didn't know how to learn. I just knew how to regurgitate. And this is figuring shit out, not taking information and spitting it back out into a test. So I couldn't do that. And he figured out a way to unlock my brain so that I could think analytically. So I really wish I would have had someone in my ear earlier on to teach me how to study, how to not. I wrote term papers. I never read a book. I made $100 a term paper. And I would write everybody's book reports. I would never read the book, but I was a great bullshitter. Like, I was talented in certain things that really, they were good financially for me, but I wasn't necessarily academy material. But I had all the boxes checked for I had all the things that you needed to get in. I was there, but I would never have survived. I probably would have been, A, my attitude would have got me kicked out, and B, they would have found that I was a fraud in my brain and threw me out. So, but I do regret not having had the balls to go and see if it was for me.
Well, I mean, you know this, and I've already mentioned it a few times, but that first day of my math class, at the prep school, at West Point Prep School, before I went there, and you and I have a similar story. I enlisted when I was 17 and graduated basic training in the Army on my 18th birthday. And it was 2 years later, that's when I went to the prep school. And that first day of math class, I mean, the reason it's called the dot on the left, because for both the English and the math portion of the SATs, my score was on the bottom left of the bell curve both times, right? So that first day, the square in a collegiate level math class. So you're talking about, like, you were able to at least regurgitate some of this. I never even learned it. I was on a 7th grade level working with math, and it was a long road, but you would have done all right if you had went through the prep school to get to there, right? Because you would have had to figure it out at a slower pace. And that's what I was fortunate enough to have that year to get myself ready. Although, I just wrote a post about that. Like, there's this one bench at West Point that I would go and sit on every semester at the end of the semester, because I'd always have some bad grades. And that first semester, as my plebe year, went into the finals. And that's when I always say I found the bench that has my name on it. It says perseverance. So if you go up to Trophy Point at West Point, that's the first thing I always go visit, is that bench that I would go and sit on every semester. And so, it was, I needed that year to prepare me to get to go there. And so sometimes, that's all we need, is that little bit of extra time in the maturation process, which some of us, we need it. You don't even know it yourself, but some of us need it faster, longer than others.
My son wants to be a Navy SEAL. I'm trying to convince him to go Ranger or SF versus Navy SEAls. We'll see how that goes. Buddy of mine, who's also West Point grad, I had him on last week. I don't know if you saw that one, Garth Estat. He's a West Pointer. He's going to help try to convince my son. But one of the reasons why I want my son to go into an academy or ROTC at the worst case is because of the maturation process. Just knowing I was a late mature as far as my attitude and my perception on life and how I dealt with adversity and all that kind of stuff. And I think he's going to be in the same boat. So I don't want him to have to go through, especially in today's day and age in the military, where we've been in conflict at war for the last 17, 18 years, up until between, I guess, Vietnam and the Gulf War, there was a couple skirmishes, but for the most part, if you went in the military during that time, you may have never deployed. You may never have put a bullet in your M16 other than on the range. So now today, my son will be going for certain into a combat zone if he were to enlist in the military and go the traditional route. For me, I would prefer to see him go in as an officer. He has amazing leadership qualities, and he's certainly going to be a strong leader. I just want to make sure that he's mentally prepared to handle what the world is going to throw at him when he's finally in that point where if he makes it to SEALs or whatever he decides to do, when he gets thrown into that, oh shit, I'm in combat moment. Do you find, and there was a question tied into this, do you find that having had, even though you enlisted in the Army at 17, and then you went to West Point, that time between your 17th birthday, when you were 17, you went into the Army as enlisted, to when you graduated West Point, did you find that your maturation during that time made you a better soldier than maybe you had if you would have stayed enlisted the entire time?
Oh, there's no doubt. And, I talk about the whole idea of leadership is learning who you are as a leader. That's one of those things. But really, the experiences you're not going to get anywhere else in the world. You got to remember that 9/11 was during my senior year at West Point. So at the beginning of all that, you start to take that last year at the academy very seriously, because you know in your future as an infantry platoon leader, or as an infantry officer, you're going to lead 40 people. And there's no joking around about it anymore. I mean, before that, I'm not saying our classes joked around. There was always, you had the seriousness of it. But graduating, even a few years before that, in 96 or 97 versus 2002, we were going straight into combat. A year later, 2 years later, we're going to be somewhere. And it did change, from 17 to 20, 24 when I graduated. That was such a huge jump in just me personally. And what I would attribute to that is the people I was surrounded by, the experiences I had, because I was fortunate, I got to do some cadet lead experience. I did air assault school. I did all this real world Army stuff as well. And I'd already been in the Army. And so I knew what it was like to be enlisted. So it's so funny when I would go to my first unit at 1st Cav at Fort Hood, and they found out I was enlisted before, it was almost like a sense of relief came over them. Like, he understands, he gets it. And I was so thankful to have that opportunity of knowing what that felt like, not to make that situation easier, but I knew what it was like to be them. And, on the other side, I knew what kind of leader I was going to be because of that. And so it was a huge jump of finding out really who I was as a leader, and then really defining what kind of leader I wanted to be, especially while you're in combat. Because many of us don't know until that first bullet goes past your face, right? And so I was surprised. I was very calm and collected, and pretty much the same guy I'd been the entire time throughout training with the soldiers and being over there. I mean, being in a panic does not change the situation at all. And so when you have 80 eyes looking at you to see what you're going to do, the only thing you could do is keep calm and make sure you're this kind of just this rock for them at any given point while you're there. So,
and I think that's, I've been in business now for 12 years, almost 11 years, owned a business. And what I've learned throughout my life all started, outside of the being a hood rat and growing up in an urban environment and the life lessons I learned on the streets, but my lessons of leadership, my lessons of how to solve problems, how to remain calm under extreme pressure and duress, how to get other people to find out their own abilities and their own strengths and utilize them and help them grow as leaders. That's all in my military time. Every single second of that experience of 4 years was what laid the foundation for everything that I am today as far as a leader. And I think if you've been in a combat environment while you're in the military, it's like a 10x multiplier of your ability to not just lead, but also problem solve, assess, and handle immediate situations, and then come up with plans for the ones that haven't yet happened yet, but are about to. Those are all the things that the military teaches leaders to become and to develop their own leadership qualities. What do you think was the single greatest leadership quality you learned from your time in the military?
I get asked this, and it's usually what was the greatest thing from West Point, because I think that's two separate things for me, although they're very applicable. The first thing, I was the cadet company commander for what's called Buckner 2 training, and it's the sophomores going into training for their sophomore year, and I was going to be a senior into that next year. And there are several officers that taught me the sense of urgency and what that means. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it as a cadet all the way up until that training environment and that specific moment where I was like, oh God, like sense of urgency. Like things need to be done now. There is no yesterday, there's no tomorrow. It's right now. Things have to happen. And that little trick, that sense of urgency to push myself. 9/11 literally was a month later after I finished that training. a month later, and to me, that sense of urgency is what I learned there. But once I got into combat, and that became second nature, the sense of urgency, like there's, everything's life and death. Everything is life and death. The thing that was the hardest for me to do once I got out of the military and that transition is realize not everything's life and death. And he could be misconstrued as, you're a little bit laid back for this, aren't you? And it's like, do you think having a presentation due, or do you think having to go do this patrol, or do you think, like you start saying, do you think that I'm even remotely bothered by these things, after what I've seen and what I've been through? And so you start to find out that all those things that got you amped up and where you were at before, you're not going to reach that level anymore of kind of heightened security and be all of that. And so you have to realize that the people around you in the corporate setting, they're not going to have that understanding of it. So you have to have your own intrinsic sense of urgency to get things done for the things that you want to get done. And then you have to realize what is acceptable in the corporate setting to push somebody and motivate them to get things done at their own sense of urgency while not alienate them, right? And it's the biggest thing to deal with when you are in the military and you come out and you're a manager, pro leader, is to realize that not everybody has your same situations and experience. And you have to marry that up with personalities and be like this basketball coach, right? And play all the right people at the right time, the right five guys to get the best effort out of the team. And that's kind of the biggest challenge, is being a leader out here in the corporate world after the military. Military, you can say what goes and it happens. There's consequences and, people get in trouble. But out here, if somebody says to your face, I don't want to do it, you have to learn how to be a real leader and walk that horse to water and make them drink. You can't just take them all the way, halfway there. And so that's kind of been the biggest things, sense of urgency, but then also realize the right timing that I can use what I learned out of the combat zone and what I learned in military leadership.
You're absolutely right on the, I own a business that employs a lot of millennials for lack of, personal trainers and strength coaches are all gung-ho right out of college. They all want to be, the next strength coach for Notre Dame or Ohio State. And everybody starts in a local gym level. And there's going to be this cycle of people to come through. You'll have a few that stay for a while, but for the most part, it's just a stopping point. And one of the things I had to learn real quickly was that I had to be okay with the fact that I was giving them everything that I could give them, and they weren't going to give me that in return. They were only going to give me as much as they were willing to give at that moment, knowing they weren't staying, so they weren't giving me a full investment. And I made this promise to every person I've ever hired. I said, I understand you're not going to be here forever. And it may only be a month. But what I want to make sure is that if there's any way that I can help you get to where you want to go, wherever your final destination is, if I can help you through your time here or through any connections I may have out in the world, I want to help you. But all I ask in return is that you show up for work on time, you treat my business as if it's your own while you're here, and you treat our clients as if they are the most important person at that very moment. And those are the three things I ask of all my employees. I don't care if you stay forever, but while you're here, if you give me those three things, you don't have to work 100 hours a week. You don't have to knock down every door trying to get new clients, but you have to do those three things. And I think that was how I was able to take my urgency, because you see my response to everything. You send me an email, I immediately respond. You send a text, I'm immediate. You have a voicemail, I call right back. If there's a post on Facebook, I respond. It's just how I'm wired, and I'm sure you're the same way. But not everybody is. There's people that I send a text and 4 days later they respond. I'm like, what the hell were you doing for 4 days? Like, what happened? Where did this fall in that brain of yours to where I was a 4 day later response? And who was the first day later? And who's immediately? I want to know who that person is. It might be their mom. But that's where I had to change that real quickly when I started to employ people, especially millennials they don't have the world of experience that we have. I'm not hiring 45-year-olds. I'm hiring 22-year-olds.
Well, that's, since I've been doing my PhD in leadership, one of the biggest areas that I keep coming across is the communication styles of the different generations, not just millennials. It's Z, it's X, it's baby boomers, it's World War II. It's understanding the communication styles of the people you're hiring or the people who are on your team, whether, hey, they may never want to talk to you face to face. They just want a text or an email, or phone calls are completely out. Okay, this is going to require me to become a new leader, maybe this technical leader that I didn't think I had to be in order to get things done. But it's not just that either, is that you have to figure out what drives those employees and drives those people that are on your team, because there is something that motivates them. And I do a lot of, I think you met Ted Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Back in April. And one of the things I did that was simple was how to conduct a one-on-one with an employee. Do you know how many people just get promoted in the world because they're good individual contributors, ICs, and they've never managed a person in their life? And I was like, all right, let's just talk about best practices for a one-on-one. How about you find out who they are as a person? Very much like your first question. Imagine if that's what your one-on-one was, and not having this strictly task discussion, which is what most people do. That's a completely separate meeting. How to coach and how to mentor. There's nothing to do. It really, and this was a surprise to many of those people that was in that Home Depot crowd. And once they figured that out, and it's like, look, you got to understand. And what's the best thing is you ask them to provide two things back to you from the discussion you just had, so they have a record of what they can learn from and what you have of them. And it's just such simple stuff, but people just don't think about it because they haven't managed people before. And so communication styles across the different generations, it's getting further and further apart, and it's becoming more negative. In reality, it's just things are different what drives people, and their experiences of what drives them. So I think it'll all be getting better sooner rather than later, but it's upon leaders, not managers, to figure that out.
So let's do the last 10 minutes or so of the show about where you are today. You're a speaker, you're a leadership developer, you're an author, you're going for your PhD, you have a podcast. What was the transition point for you from getting out of the military, getting into the corporate world or wherever you were doing before you became who you are today? When was that transition where you said, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to become a speaker, or I'm going to do all these things that we're doing today? What was that tipping point for you? Unless it was what you talked about earlier with the graduate from your MBA. Was that your tipping point?
I don't know if that was the tipping point. I got another story that goes after that, but I'm still doing a 9-to-5 job as well. And after I did that MBA program and I was still working a full-time job, you realize how good and efficient you have to be with time. You have so much homework, you have so much reading to do, you have all these things. And so I became much more efficient with my time. But the tipping point was I graduated from school. I finally did all that reflection, found out what I wanted to do. And I put some in front of me in 2017. I was going to climb Mount Rainier, which I did on Memorial Day weekend of 2017. So I climbed a mountain, which I never thought that was going to happen. I decided I was going to publish the book, which by the stars lining up, I met somebody here in Austin that knew all these different publishers. And he introduced me to the one I liked, and my book came out December 2017. Next thing was to continue my PhD. Those were 3 big goals for me, to continue doing that, because I'd only been in the PhD program at that point, at the beginning of 2017, for like 2 months, 3 months maybe. And I knocked all those things out. And you kind of go, well, what am I going to plan for 2018? And what am I going to plan for, you do all these are big goals. But that 2017, that year, really was a turning point that if I stop and I reflect on what I love doing, and then I train for it and I go out and do it, the satisfaction of getting those things done is beyond a description to anybody. And I've just always been a goal setter. And that's really what came out of that is I can set these goals. I can achieve these goals. Not that I didn't have all that stuff before, but I mean, I put some things out there that were pretty big that I had been sitting on for a long time. And I think the sooner we realize to just live outside the comfort zone, the better we become as people. And that's just kind of always I've been doing, and that was a turning point in 2017. And then just like for this year, I was like, I always do these cards. What am I going to do this year? And I decided I was going to end up lifting 100 tons in one day, which is 200,000 pounds. And I already reached that goal a few weeks ago. I'm not like this giant lifting guy or any of that stuff, but it was, I'd seen a couple places where they kind of make a big deal about it. And I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do for a lifting goal this year. And, at my gym, that's what they were helping me doing. So I'm constantly trying to live outside that comfort zone. And I've always found a way to do that. So.
All right. One last question. What is your goal? Like I when I started to really think of myself as a speaker and as an author and this transitional moment where I knew that I was doing a lot of speaking, but I was doing it for free and I was just doing it because I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing and sharing my brother's story. And then I ran out of time because I had to start saying no because I was taking time off of work that I could have used for vacation with my family to work for free. And so I had this moment where I said, I have to really make a choice. Do I want to really be a speaker, or do I want to just be a cop who volunteers his time whenever he feels like it to help kids and do talks in school? Obviously, I chose to become a speaker. But for me, that was a decision that was I struggled with because I didn't want to accept money for something I felt was just what God wanted me to do, was to share the story. But I realized that I had to value my time above all else because I was stealing time from my family and other people. So for me, when I came up with, if I'm going to get money for this, if I'm going to ask somebody to pay me, I have to have a bigger goal outside of just a profession. And I remember sitting down with John Kane, who's one of my best buddies and mentors, and just a guy he can honestly share his thoughts with me without me getting pissed off, which is very few people that can do that. And he said, what I'm hearing you say is you want to live a life that's rememberable, that you want somebody to remember you when this is all done. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create this life where no matter what you do, you want to be remembered. And that's it. I really just want to live a life that was so magnificent that I will always be remembered for it. So my question for you is, when you made this transition, when you decide you're going to write these books and get your PhD and start your podcast and inspire people and motivate people and do all the stuff that you're doing, what is your goal, your end game for it all, if it's not just a profession?
Yeah, I think you're addressing that area that you brought up. It's discussed in a lot of leadership books is your legacy and what you want to do with that. And for me, it's never been that kind of thing. My books will be around forever, right? I mean, that the book is going to be around forever, so I don't have to worry about that. I'd like to believe that the podcasts that I did are out there on the internet, and they'll be there for at least a pretty long time, unless those companies go under, right? And there's newspaper articles from my deployment in Iraq, and there's yearbooks, and if you look at my office, you can see all these things around me that are kind of this legacy of things that I want to do. But I think it's really, how I define leadership is in three ways. I say, you lead by example, you earn trust, and you be willing to sacrifice. Those are the three things I think that make up leadership. And that's what speaking is for me. That's what writing a book is. I want to be the example for others. So I love mentoring people. I want to earn trust. I want people to look at what I've done and realize that they can trust what I'm saying to them is true, and that they want to use that as kind of maybe this kicking off point for them. So it inspires them. Obviously, that's why we do the speak. And then your dream and your goal, that's the other piece of it, is that I want somebody else to know what it's like. Because I've been on this PhD road for about 3 years. Like most people give up on school after the first 6 months or a year. And this is with a family while I'm speaking and doing podcasts and all of this. And I'm not going to be done until the end of 2020. And I realize that. But at the end of that day, that, and my future and that legacy that I want to have is all those things I just talked about. And so that's kind of what I look at it as, what I want to have with it. And that's what I really hope to do is just, set the example for others to follow dreams and goals, earn trust by what I'm saying to them, and then just show what it's like to sacrifice for something that you really want in life. And I hope that goes a long way with people that come on my podcast, listen to your podcast, for my kids, for my family, and just like you're doing for your family. You're setting that example and being that person. I think at the end of the day, that's really where I want to go with it.
That's a great way to end the show, man. Let's tell everybody where they can find your book, your podcast, any information that you want to share with the listeners.
Yeah, so the book itself, The Dot on the Left, you can find anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you can find it, all of that. But, since I'm on your show, if anybody actually wants a signed copy from me, if you find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, please connect with me there. I'll send you a PayPal link and I'll mail you one out, a signed copy for Matt's fans and audience for Facebook land. My podcast, just type in Goat Wrestling Perseverance. There is nowhere else out there called Goat Wrestling Perseverance. You heard the goat story. Hope you like that today. And, just listen to it. It's 20 minutes. So for anybody out there who's like, I don't have more than 15 minutes. Well, I've got the podcast for you. It's 15 minutes. You get to hear a perseverance story from Emmy winners, from White House correspondents to adventurers to actresses, all these people.
To this guy.
And Matt Cubbler, the viral rapping cop, episode number 1. If you have not listened to that, go back to that one. I apologize. I've gotten much better at editing since then on the audio. But, that's the podcast. That's all that stuff. And for speaking, people can find me at GoWrestlingPerseverance.com. The podcasts are on there too. You can find videos. I've got all the YouTube videos are there, speaker reels, everything. And, thanks for letting me be on the show, Matt. And that listen to Matt's show, give him love, write the reviews, do all that great stuff because you're deserving, buddy.
Thanks, pal. Hang tight. We're going to talk offline. I just want to close out the show real quick. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to my buddy, Dave Swanson, for being my guest tonight. Please go buy his book, listen to his podcast, hire him to speak, whatever it is you need. I'm sure he can somehow provide. And listen, we only get one shot at life. Let's do it right. Let's be kind. Let's do things for others. Let's live in a servant mindset. And for God's sakes, everybody, go out and be kind to one another.